Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and I've been keeping real busy doing a bunch of different things. Like if you can see over behind me here, I'm trying to get a bunch of Arturia key steps to work in a new way, and I've started a new podcast, which is kind of a secret patron-only podcast having to do with the secrets of classic old vinyl records. And well, if you're my patron, you'll have heard about that. But what I'm giving you today is a plugin or a set of plugins, if you're on AU, called SoftGate. And this one's been around for a while, so basically what I'll do is just demonstrate it a little bit and explain what it's about. This was made for the purposes of doing better samples and things. Like if you've got a recording, maybe something that's going to be automatically split out to individual samples, and you've got like individual drum hits or individual piano notes, something like that, and you want it to be cleaned up so that the tail end of things isn't too hissy or whatever, this is your thing. It is a gate, but it's a gate that shuts down very nicely and has a certain threshold so that it doesn't necessarily get too exaggerated, and it has a brightness control as well. And I'll show you what that sounds like now. In a normal setting, it'll sound kind of like this. It's a raw recording, and you're pretty much not going to hear it engage at all. But if we turn it way up, you hear it starting to kick in with this treble roll-off. And the purpose of that is to get rid of hiss in your recording so that the tail end of your samples don't start building up a lot of hiss for you. And we can turn it back down a little bit. And then we've got darken speed and bass silence. And what those mean is this. You can hear it going quieter already. If we turn this way up, you can start hearing darken speed. And that will exaggerate the sound of things a lot, or you can even make it extreme. In such a way that you can still have the sound of it, but then the instant you stop, it starts muting the highs there. And then bass silence does something else. Namely, it lets you bring back in the raw sound so that you can moderate the intensity of this darkening and gating to avoid things getting unnatural. And these work together in such a way that you might want to throw some kind of compressor on afterwards. Perhaps I can do a bit of that. Like, I don't know, let's pick something radical like pop or something. Pop is a very aggressive compressor. And so that is on after SoftGate. We can cut the output down a little bit. And doing this, you can hear what it'll do to the fading tail of notes and things, to the extent that this shows them. Let's see, there's a section over here that has some quiet stuff in there. So if I played this, it's amplifying the reverb tail enormously. And I can speed up the darken speed a little bit. And if the bright threshold is really low, you'll have full brightness, but we can also suppress that a great deal. And then with something like this, and again, the reason I have the heavy compressor on there is to make it really obvious what the reverb tail sounds like, because the comparison is the hiss level between that. Let's shorten that down a little bit, because the sustaining symbol is something that it's going to try to grab onto. The noise level you'd get would be compared to, for instance, this. And granted, this is not the noisiest recording. Let's grab another little section. And it's mightily heavily compressed. This is with it off. Speed it up a little bit. And you can get it to suppress noise quite a lot. Then you pull it back a little bit. And in so doing, you can get it so that your raw sample recordings can be split up into individual samples more easily. And the individual samples will tail off more quietly and suppress background noise and stuff like that. It'll control them in that way. Or, of course, you can do silly things like exaggerate it. Please don't use this for mastering. Well, I mean, I suppose you could. If you had something where there was a lot of bursts of loud noise and then bursts of relative quiet that needed to be really quiet, technically I suppose you could, but you'd want to do it in a graceful way. And that's kind of what this is all about. The idea is not to do like wacky aggressive effects like this. Where it's making stuff really staccato. The point is to have stuff where the background noise might be a little more hissy than you'd like, and you take the threshold right down, perhaps while using a compressor or something. Have a reasonable darken speed, which might not be all that fast, or perhaps a bass silence that still lets a certain amount through. And then when stuff gets good and quiet, your background noise would also be nice and quiet. So that's SoftGate for you. The VST version is the stereo version, which is linked so it's not going to do any crazy things with your stereo using the darken or the gating, because the whole idea is to be able to take a stereo recording and not have like crazy stereo shifts going on. And since it's a stereo plugin, it won't load onto mono audio unit tracks, so there is also a mono version which runs as, in fact, I can probably load that up, where, let's see, S for SoftGate, SoftGate mono. You can call it stereo, but it's really N-to-N, meaning any number of tracks to any number of tracks. And if we use this one, will find that the sides are independently gating, and that means the stereo image is going to jump wildly from side to side. So for using stereo tracks, you're going to want to use the stereo version, whether that be the VST or whether that be the audio unit regular version. Because otherwise you'll have these crazy stereo sides. And that's pretty distracting. So you don't want that unless maybe it's for effect. Anyway, here is SoftGate. Like I said, I'm doing a number of things these days. I'm doing that podcast. It is the secret podcast for only my patrons. And the reason for that is that I tried to do it on YouTube, and because I'm showing people actual vinyl record output the way it existed back in the day, you know, the stuff where these classic albums actually caused all of that attention and love all those years ago, and people just went bonkers over those sounds. I'm showing that, so YouTube got all upset about it and hit me with a gajillion copyright strikes, and I can't be doing that again. They said that my channel was not in danger, and I said, yet, and I'd better not try that again. So you'd have to be a patron to hear any of this stuff, but I'm self-hosting it, and you're never actually going to get a full song out of that because it's entirely for fair use. It's demonstrating how this stuff was done, what was used in it, which is often not about like plugins of some kind. People ask, like, how can I find out what plugins and EQs and compressors were used on these classic albums? Usually they weren't. The point I'll be making is that usually they weren't. And it should be pretty fun, because though I am very polite and well-groomed and with a lovely nice shirt and all that kind of stuff on my plugin release videos, on this podcast you get like Chris After Dark, and I'll say what I really think. So join the Patreon at whatever amount you want. I'd like to see if you would buy plugins from me. Pretend you're buying them and pay like $50 a year for whichever plugin you would be choosing to buy, and that works out pretty well for everybody. But failing that, you can just jump on for $1 a month, and that'll still qualify you to get this podcast. And hopefully people will enjoy that. It's going to be a bit of a strain for me because this is incredibly important stuff, and it's also kind of challenging because I get kind of worked up and upset about this stuff. But it's also very satisfying because these are the things I care about most. And I am looking forward to getting the word out. The message I have there is people are wondering, like, what do you have to do in order to get these retro kinds of classic recordings? What's so amazing and involving and stuff? And I'm like, dude, that's not nearly as hard as you think. It is a matter of how you choose to mix and record, much more than emulating all the little signal paths of things. You generally will have to sort of darken and saturate stuff maybe a little bit, but it's much more about the choices you make than it is about like having the digital clones of all these different bits of gear. That is a sidetrack. You're going to want to avoid that. So, with that said, here is SoftGate, and as you see for the audio unit, since you can load stereo VSTs onto audio mono tracks pretty easily, but with the Mac and with the audio unit, you need to have a special one to load on mono tracks if you have a linked stereo, which this is designed to be linked stereo. So there's that. The audio unit has two versions because it's supposed to be linked. And I don't know whether you'll be using this to control background noise in music that has loud and quiet bits, or whether you're making samples or what you're doing. But I hope you get some use out of this. I've had it around for a while, and it's one of those ones that I just needed to bring out. I'm working on some other stuff, like, for instance, I've been asked for Purist Air, and I realized that I didn't have that out. I also found a project called Purist Clip, and started looking into that one. That never came out. So that's something I'm going to have to look into. Honestly, the purest clip that I have is clip only. So this purest clip would have to mean something else. And I haven't worked out exactly what it's supposed to do, but I do have the project, and I might be looking into that a little bit. We'll see. I got a lot of irons in the fire. But I hope you like SoftGate, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.